Good afternoon and welcome to Designing for COVID-19 and Beyond, another webinar brought to you by Plan New Hampshire. I'm Robin LeBlanc, the Executive Director of Plan, and I'm really glad to have all of you here today. Next slide, please. This webinar has been approved for credits. So if you want AIA credits, there's 1.25. Please send your name and your AIA number to me, and we'll be sure to get those together and submit them where they need to go. If you need AICP credits, please note that this program is program number 9201925. You have to attend the full webinar to get your credits, so please keep that in mind. I want to thank Kathy Porter at LaValle for helping to pull this all together, and to Brian Pratt at Fuss & O'Neill, who is actually the man behind the curtain here. He's the one that's kind of managing the technology. And I want to thank Fuss & O'Neill as a whole, because they're the ones that said, yes, you can use this GoToWebinar platform, our subscription, so that we could bring you this webinar in last month, this month, and then next month we'll be doing it. So thanks to them. That's great. Next slide, please. So Plan New Hampshire, for those of you who don't know, we have a vision of healthy and vibrant communities across the state. And our mission to get there is to foster excellence in planning and design and development of our built environment. So our strategy is to share information and inspiration for how community design and the built environment can contribute positively to where we live, work, and play. So sharing that information and inspiration, we do it through things just like this webinar. So thank you for being here. We are a member organization. Many of you out there are members of Plan New Hampshire. If you're not, we invite you to consider becoming a member. If you want to talk to us about that, we'd be happy to do that. Next slide, please. So for our agenda today, we've got Mark Muller from JSA Architects. We have Jeff Hyland, a landscape architect from Ironwood Design Group in Newmarket, and Greg Michaelides with August Consulting in Rye. It was just a coincidence that all of them are on the seacoast today, but we're happy to have all of them. They're each going to give a little presentation about their view, about their viewpoint of how the COVID has affected the built environment and our communities. After they get through talking about that, then we'll have a discussion. Q&A, please put in the bottom on the right hand side, there's a chat box, and you can enter your questions into the chat box, and then Brian will be collecting them at the end. He'll read them aloud, and then we'll be able to address the questions there. So first up, we have Mark Muller from JSA. Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself and what is it that you stand for in your work? And what is it that you've seen and observed in your work about the effects of COVID and what you need to be thinking about going forward?
All right, very good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Muller from JSA Architects. I'd like to just begin with just a brief overview of some of the work that we've done and take a look at how the pandemic might affect it going forward. For the past 25 years, I've served as the principal designer on many of our projects, spanning a lot of the markets that we're active in, from healthcare, hospitality, higher ed, and senior living. Our work's predominantly in New England, but it also spans into Florida, and we've also done work on the ski slopes of Colorado and Utah. I've always strived to be as conscious as possible of scale when approaching design challenges, even in very large buildings. I'm looking for opportunities to use texture, local materials, regional influences, that sort of thing, in a way that's engaging and memorable. Establishing this intimate scale, human scale, particularly at an entrance, front of the building, that can convey a powerful message that resonates through the entire design. So that's a common thread, I'd like to think, to all the work that I've done. So what has COVID revealed to me about design? What I thought I would do is just take a look at some of the projects that we've done relative to the challenges that COVID presents, and try to identify some attributes that are working, maybe unintentionally, but they're still working, and others that might face some challenges or need some adjustment going forward. So really just have 4 or 5 bullet points. But as we've all been learning, gathering spaces, looking for ways to socially distance ourselves, but still coming together. Gathering spaces are common to everything that we do, lobbies, dining rooms, you name it. But one of the things that I think is important, and just something that we need to keep in mind, is to make sure that within these areas there are multiple locations where people can congregate. It's not just forcing everyone into a funnel where they have to occupy a very narrow amount of space. Create multiple places within these gathering locations where people can gather. Look for multiple entrances and exits into these spaces, so it can be a very porous perimeter, so that people can escape if they sense that it's getting too crowded. And also look for ways to preview spaces. We use that term a lot in senior living, but in social settings, people might not feel comfortable socializing with either a lot of people or specific people. So looking for opportunities where you can even see in the image in the upper right, it's a small little nook by a fireplace, but there's plenty of opportunity to look into that nook, either through the bookcases or through the openings in the corner, so you can see who's in there, see if that room is occupied, see if it's crowded. So you can preview that space before you commit yourself to going into it. I think that previewing is an important aspect. So waiting areas, waiting rooms, particularly in densely used locations like medical office buildings, doctor's offices, those may become a thing of the past as our sort of collective comfort level with technology improves. Video conferencing, telemedicine, and even leveraging simple tools like just texting, like we do now for curbside pickup at a takeout restaurant. That may dramatically impact our reliance on dense packing people into waiting rooms. The short-term solutions that we see at virtually every retail location, and what we're about to see in many restaurants where plexiglass is being used extensively, we've done that in more permanent applications like you see on the lower right in waiting rooms. So that's a possibility moving forward. I think that work's done and would continue to work. One of the things that we're finding most important, though, in many of the projects, particularly the residential projects, is the connection to the outdoors. These extended periods of quarantine or sheltering in place, particularly for seniors, they can leave all of us yearning to enjoy some fresh air. So I would encourage us all to look for any opportunity we can to create an outdoor room, particularly one that's accessible for everybody. And within private residential units, consider, the Romeo and Juliet balcony or a French balcony, like you see in the lower left. Look for opportunities to give people the sense that they're able to enjoy the outdoors, even if it's from their own private living unit. Ingenuity. I think we've all seen funny images like this where necessity is the mother of invention. Hopefully these sort of extremes will be short-lived. Some of the lessons that we're going to learn throughout this process are probably worthy of sticking around, and they may become second nature to us going forward. I think history does repeat itself, as we've all seen. And, I think just as tuberculosis sort of spawned an architectural response. You know, these are examples of Alto's a sanatorium done in the late 20s or early 30s. And this was, you know, an architectural response to an epidemic that lasted decades, really. And there are a lot of similarities to what we're going through now. I mean, tuberculosis, or the architecture that came out of trying to respond to that epidemic had a lot of similarities. These responses encouraged a lot of fresh air, hygienic environments, plenty of sunshine, access to nature. You know, see the pattern. It's no different than what we're sort of talking about now. So our collective response to COVID-19 may yield similar forms and responses that may become commonplace for years to come. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thank you very much. Next slide, please. So my name is Jeff Hyland. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer, and the founder of Ironwood Design Group, which is a small landscape architecture firm based on the seacoast of New Hampshire. Since I founded the firm, really we've focused on public spaces. Maybe you can change to the next slide. We've really focused on public spaces and designing things for people to use on a daily basis, places that create a sense of place in our communities, have a sense of kind of liveliness, activity, and hopefully have a lot of people using the spaces. These are just a few examples: streetscape project in downtown Dover, Martin Luther King Memorial in Portland, and a little playground at Squam Lake Science Center. That's a real cross-section of the kind of things we do. Some are truly municipal, public type projects, and others, like the Squam Lakes project, is a little bit more of a private project, but it's open to the public and benefits the public. All right, next slide. So what has the pandemic revealed about landscape architecture? Like a lot of the things that Mark talked about, and you can switch to the next slide, a lot of the architecture elements that Mark talked about also relate a lot to the landscape, in particular the outdoors. Clearly, people need to be outdoors at some point. When you are stuck in your house for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at some point you have to kind of get out and enjoy nature and basically recover from what you've just been through. We've seen, everyone's seen in the news how trail systems are overtaxed by users. You see them basically every community around, how bike paths are being overused. A lot of that is really because they're not designed for the level of use that we're currently seeing on a lot of them. But, you know, it does show us that they are critically important to our communities and our state as a means of getting out and recreating and basically healing from what we're going through. Next slide. The other thing that's been really obvious, and it's in the news every single day, is how beneficial our public spaces and outdoor spaces are to businesses. Just yesterday, there was a news item about Manchester opening up the option of closing off parking spaces on Elm Street so that businesses could spill into the street. These are examples of projects that are more integral. So, you know, streetscape projects where we've designed seating areas into the streetscape more as a way of, well, benefiting the business, but also kind of activating the streetscape. So one thing we've learned through COVID is that there's a lot to learn. And I think in the long run, there are going to be a lot of benefits. I think the goals of creating vibrant kind of downtown streetscapes, main streets that benefit businesses and other ventures is really important. And I think we're going to see wider sidewalks become more of a norm in our communities. Next slide. One of the things that's really interesting to me, having been involved in a few parking day and tactical urbanism projects, is how so many people have borrowed from those activities. Parking Day, if you're not familiar with it, is a once a year kind of annual event that usually happens in September, where for one day, parking spaces, underutilized urban spaces are kind of transformed to show what could be, how they could be transformed to better benefit a community. This is just an example of a parking day exhibit, but it could very well be, downtown Manchester, in July 18th, I think, when they're transforming. Next slide. There are a number of other communities that have done the same thing that Manchester's doing. Nashua was one of the first. They closed off sections of their roadways with Jersey barriers to provide more outdoor seating space. Clearly, it's an important need, and it's really the only thing that's allowing restaurants in particular to survive this. So it's really a critical thing to be flexible in our communities, to allow things like this to happen. And it's also a great kind of thing from an energy standpoint. You can see people are excited about being outdoors because they're able to get out of their houses, and it's kind of a win-win. Some communities are looking at circulation, roadway circulation, and changing to one way to enable things to happen. The next slide. And then, the next part of what I'm going to talk about is what are we doing in the short term? Well, part of what we're doing in the short term is just what I talked about, those kind of urban interventions, tactical urbanism kind of approaches. Next slide. The other thing is, obviously we have active design projects during this time. And we are going back and kind of looking at things from a design standpoint and seeing how can we make things better. We don't really know when all this is going to end. So, we're taking advantage of that. A couple projects we're working on now, we're looking at adding crosswalks to allow greater separation of people that are using a main street, allowing people to spread out and separate a little bit more. Next slide. We're also looking at some of our path projects that didn't have center lines, maybe adding center lines as a means of kind of separating the flow of traffic. Some of our projects that are under design, park projects, we're looking at adding path system or adding secondary paths that allow further separation. And then some built projects we have, we're looking at ways of kind of reducing kind of backing up of people. We want to try to keep people moving, especially on more linear type paths like river walks. There's a tendency to get clogged up a little bit because people want to start talking and chatting, and those are all the things we want it to happen on a river walk. But unfortunately, during COVID, it's a negative. So, looking at where benches are placed and reevaluating, separating benches, reconfiguring benches so that they don't create kind of a blockage to flow. Next slide. And then obviously another very short-term solution is some communities have gone out and spray painted 6-foot diameter circles, which is really a great solution and allows people to really see what 6 feet looks like. Next slide. And then long-term solutions. Next slide. I think what we're going to see is basically short-term solutions and tactical urbanism solutions expanding to become permanent. And, and it's a great thing because it's really, we're kind of using COVID as kind of an incubator to test design ideas. And I think a lot of those design ideas have a lot of merit. And I think we're going to see them continue on. And whether they're more kind of formalized outdoor seating areas like shown here, still removable, but a little more formalized, a little bit more investment. I think we're going to see that. I also think we're going to see wider sidewalks in the future where space allows. Next slide. And then, on the path projects that we're working on, I think we're going to see more permanent separation, means of separation, vegetated medians, separating pedestrian paths from bike paths, and maybe even kind of directions of travel being separated. I also think that, or I'd like to think that in our downtown areas, we're going to try to create more pocket parks, more underutilized areas becoming utilized as kind of a pressure relief area, allowing people to really get out and spread out, basically. Next slide. And one interesting thing I just wanted to make you all aware of, Landscape Forms, which is a company that fabricates a lot of outdoor furnishings, they're being very proactive about some of their product line, and they've actually started manufacturing products already that specifically geared towards social distancing. These are these kind of fun little outdoor structures that can be moved around. It's a little bit more permanent than the painted circle, but it's basically the same idea, and they're very modular. Next slide. And then, here are other examples of like streetscape furnishings where they're creating these kind of separated booths and eating areas that create a sense of separation, create a sense of kind of energy, but also keep people at their distance. And then the seating down in the right-hand corner, that's kind of a nice curvilinear bench. It has these alternating colors to show where 6-foot distance is, but you can basically sit on the whole thing. It just happens that, when needed, there's a 6-foot kind of identifier there. Next slide. And then lastly, from a planning standpoint, there are a number of communities that have started kind of planning for COVID-19, both how can you deal with it today, and what about the future, should something like this happen? The Boston Tactical Public Realm Guidelines are something that was done, I think, about 2 years ago for Boston, and it did look at underutilized public spaces and how they could be transformed temporarily. It was not designed for COVID, but it does definitely have some application now. And Portsmouth has also gone through a very similar approach of kind of looking at their public thoroughfares and how they can be transformed in a short-term fashion. All right, last slide. And with that, I will wait for questions later on, but I thank you very much for taking the time to participate today. Thank you.
Greg, we're not hearing you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Greg McIntyre from August Consulting. I'm a professional civil engineer with predominantly focusing on site design and permitting on the private sector. I've been consulting for almost about 40 years, projects throughout New England and the United States. And so I'm going to give you my perspective from a civil engineer, also as a volunteer. I've been chairman of the Recreation for over 20 years and been involved with youth sports and coaching and board members for over 30 years. And I'm going to just expand on the Rye Recreation. We've been trying literally for 10 years to get a community center in town, and we finally got a nice piece of property, a church that was underutilized. We had a couple stories. We've been working the last 2 or 3 years on plans for a community center. So our whole goal was to bring the community together right in the center of town. Anything from pre-K all the way up to our seniors. We have a pretty large senior population, and you can imagine this whole COVID situation has just turned that upside down, where we've been focusing for 10 years trying to bring everybody together. Now we're regrouping, trying to figure out, how do you socially distance and, keep the generations apart. So that has been an absolute challenge. Next slide, please, Mark. Professionally, on the civil engineering side, it's amazing the calls I'm getting on, commercial and retail properties. Everybody wants outdoor seating, maximize, what they have, create new, and, another byproduct of this has been the customer pickup area. You always design shopping centers, retail for, customers walking the front door and product coming in and out from the back through loading docks. So now with all the, drop-off areas and pickups, now we have to try to accommodate customers at the front of the stores, which are, some of the prime spaces for customers. Next slide, please, Mark. So what have I observed over the last 3 or 4 months? Really the most recent projects, I'll say the last 5 to 10 years, those are really more adaptable. I'm sure, most of you know in this call, there's been this shift to mixed use lifestyle centers, wider sidewalks, activated side seating, outdoor seating, pedestrian friendly, more green, less parking. So it's been actually less of a challenge on the more recent projects to accommodate, the new COVID situation. What we're finding out is the older sites, those are a lot more difficult to adapt. And I call it the Walmart of the 90s. They came in, convinced everybody, municipalities themselves, that, everybody needed 7 spaces per 1,000. Everybody, went with those designs. So, been doing this for almost 40 years. So I look back at some of the designs, late 80s, 90s, and, what people were looking for. And those are the more difficult sites. In one aspect, there's a lot more paving, so you can deal with it. But in the negative of that, there's a lot more paving. So, it's not as soft and accommodating as some of the newer projects. Next slide, Mark. So again, just, I'm calling it the misdirection of the 90s. Is now being corrected. So as I just mentioned, there is more flexibility with this pandemic. The other thing, I've been noticing over the last 5 years, it's a bigger, more competition. So developers are adding more and more amenities, attract, they're mixed use, so they want to attract residents. They want to attract tenants, keep customers on site for as long as they can. So, we're seeing things like dog parks and cafe seating and pocket parks, paths, walking trails. And that's really, again, that's been extremely helpful to try to deal with this COVID situation and, how to get the public and keep them separated. So it's been a lot easier. And a good example is the last slide I have, is working on a project. One more slide, Mark. Yeah, so this is a project up in Rochester, the Ridge. It's first phase is 360,000 square feet, more of a conventional, if you will, retail project. That one was in the works and plannings for, probably 15, 20 years I've been on that site. Phase 2 is we're working on right now. It's another 150,000 square feet, and it's going to be more of a active recreation, movie theaters, bowling. We're going to be tying in with some restaurants, and we were starting, quite frankly, prior to this COVID situation, creating a more active, pedestrian-friendly, less cars situation over there, and just kind of tying it into the other center. And this is just an example. What you see, the existing events, the park has been more than successful. They have a small park out there, and they hold community events 12 months a year. So we're basically going to almost double or triple similar type park on phase 2, and also tie it into the snowmobile trails. There's hiking trails. So I think those are some of the things we're going to see going forward in the design. So with that, that's my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Hi, everyone. This is Brian Pratt from Fuss & O'Neill. So if you have questions, you can either type them into the chat box, the questions box, or if you hit the raise hand button, I can enable your microphone and let you speak to the panelists.
Yeah, that's great. Do we have any questions, Brian?
There's no written questions so far.
Why don't we open up and show all of our speakers, show all of our presenters, and see if they have, I've got a couple of comments, and see if they want to comment to each other. One of the interesting things with each of you, it was interesting to me because you're each talking about responding through design, responding to this, but through this response and how you're designing things are really going to help shape how people behave in the future in different ways, in different realms, whether you're in a building or outside. That's an observation I had. How about any of you? Do you have any comments on what you heard from other folks, from the others of you? There were some pretty interesting points that you all made.
You know,
I'll speak up. Okay, Mark.
I mentioned this when we chatted the first time last week. I found it interesting when I look back at other municipalities. Before I moved out east, I spent a fair amount of time, went to college in Minnesota. And for anyone who's familiar with Minneapolis, they have a wonderful downtown lake system, a number of lakes that are all common space around the entire perimeter. So there's no public or no private property, no houses that have lake frontage. It's all beautiful walking and riding trails. And what they ended up doing, and they had the luxury of having the space to do it, is that they had created a dual trail system. So as Jeffrey was talking about needing to actually paint a center line down a trail, there was a situation where you had two trails that were parallel to one another. They were separated by anywhere from 10 to 20 feet, maybe more in some instances. And even 35 years ago when I was there, there was a movement to make sure, and I think this was brought on because of a number of accidents, a number of collisions from bicyclers or rollerbladers. That was quite popular at the time, and pedestrians. So their dual paths were set up so they were one way only. So if you were jogging or walking, you went counterclockwise around the lake, and anything on wheels, rollerblades, bicycles, whatever, they would go the other direction. And people, I don't think you could actually be ticketed for it, but it was just one of those sort of social agreements that everyone said, look, this actually works to do this. And so everyone they did it, and it worked. And I'm sure it's still working today, no problem. But it took sort of a social contract for everyone to say, this is what we need to do to really enjoy this space and make sure it doesn't create a nuisance or a problem, and it's safe for everyone.
Yeah, and I agree. I think we're going to see a lot of changes occur. I think it's definitely COVID-19 has created enough of an impact on us all that it is going to be something, and I'm speaking more about the public process and municipal projects that where we go through, a collaborative kind of community-driven design process. It is something that is already beginning to come up in public forums about how do we respond to this and how do we address this so that we have enough space, like you're talking about, Mark, to separate appropriately. The challenge, one of the big challenges is in New England, we generally have limited space, and even on our, rail trails, there's generally limited space. And the other thing is funds, right? It's still kind of unknown whether there are going to be federal funds available for addressing, greater separation in the future, and there may be. I'm not really sure, but the cost associated with increasing the width of path systems or multi-use trails down Main Street sidewalks, if you go from 7 feet to 10 feet, it's a pretty big ticket item. And then there's a maintenance component too. So I think there's going to be a lot of juggling, a lot of balancing of these different issues. But I'm certain that the impact of COVID has been dramatic enough that it's kind of here to stay as a design criteria, at least to a certain extent.
Yeah, so I'll just add, I mean, it's all evolving. It's, been only 3 to 4 months, and, where everybody's trying to be helpful as soon as the weather turned and outdoor seating was allowed, let's just throw some seating here. You can almost, on the back of a napkin, get an approval to do it. Now I'm starting to get the sense from some of these towns that, this may be a seasonal thing. Probably going to want to do it next year. Now there's not just 2 establishments, there's 6 establishments. So starting to see a more formal design process where they're looking for engineered plans, architectural plans. So I think that's going to evolve. And to Jeff's point, yeah, this is probably not just a seasonal this year. It's going to be next year, and who knows how long this is going to be. So that's what I'm seeing. We're starting to get some feedback and discussion on fire codes, ADA codes, traffic barriers. So I think people are now just kind of stepping back and going, okay, this wasn't a 30-day, 60-day thing. That seating could be there till November, till our season changes, and it could be back out there again next April or May. So that's what I see evolving. And then just going back to my other side, my volunteer side, we're still trying to figure that out. I mean, we've canceled all our summer programming, we've summer camp. So as the landscape architects, the architects, start designing for the future, we're all still trying to figure that out. Is, how do we accommodate our kids and classes and teachers, and, how do we break it up? So it's a challenge.
Great, thanks guys. We have some questions. Brandon Holden was the first one to raise his hand. I've enabled your audio. So Brandon, do you want to speak a question?
Oh yeah, great. Hi guys. Yeah, I just want to say, thanks for putting this together. It's great to hear the ideas and the thinking that you guys are putting into this. And I know it's across the board, having impacts everywhere. So, and I think you guys started to touch on this as well in your conversation here. But that's what we see is what's going to happen here, and when the weather turns again and it gets cold, like you're saying, there are a couple this year, and I feel like, what we've been hearing from a lot of the restaurants is it's going to be really difficult to kind of maintain through the winter without the outdoor seating. So when you go back to just that takeout only element, or just very limited indoor capacity, is that going to be enough to sustain the restaurants? And, just from that level, I think it's going to be a challenge. So I don't know if you guys have thought more about that, and really, like you're saying, just the limit of space and the inability to really be indoors with enough people to sustain the businesses, that there could be this significant drop by next season as well, which is, a fear. So again,
I would envision that there will be pressure to extend the season as long as possible. So, and what will begin to happen is that we're going to start seeing a lot more infrastructure, portable infrastructure, that makes its way out onto the sidewalk. We're going to find more propane heaters. We're going to start littering the sidewalk with a lot of stuff that can allow people to be comfortable in November. Some climates can pull that off. But my daughter did a foreign exchange semester in Finland a couple of years ago, and when my wife visited them in really in the middle of winter, it was remarkable to see images in downtown Oslo of outdoor dining venues, and these were little wire chairs outside on a sidewalk, but the wire chairs, they all had a sheepskin cover with a propane heater next to it. It looked actually quite inviting. Those sorts of locations probably can pull it off. much longer than we ever thought we would need to. So, that would be my fear, though, is that we start to litter the sidewalk, and God forbid there's an accident, some car drives where they're not supposed to, or there's some problem with a propane heater or something like that. Once that happens, and it's going to, I think that may shape what people want to do and for how long.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, that's interesting to think about for sure. And I like the idea of that. I think, where I haven't even thought of that, like, sitting there dining outside in your ski gear, where you're warmer and you're, like you do after ski, you think about that type of environment where you're sitting outside and it's negative degrees and by a fire, right?
Like I fishermen do it all the time.
Thanks.
Great, thanks, Brandon. We got a few more questions in. This one is pretty similar. It says, what happens when winter conditions come around? Lots of outdoor solutions will go away. Then restaurants need new ways of operating in more than just the summer. I think that was already answered with that last conversation. So I'll move on to the next one. What design elements should we be thinking about for wintertime when people are indoors?
Well, I tried to touch upon some of that. I think it's difficult to imagine that as Greg said, we're sort of 3.5 months into this, that a lot of our design elements, permanent design elements, projects that are on the boards right now are going to change dramatically. I think everyone's probably going to be in a wait and see, how long is it going to take to till there's a vaccine? Is this a short-lived period of caution? But with that said, I think there are a lot of things that we can do that just make good sense. I mean, as I tried to illustrate in some of the tuberculosis example, there are a lot of things that were very appealing about the architectural responses to that pandemic or epidemic, and that we had some beautiful outdoor terraces that were created. A lot of the architecture, particularly in the 30s, they started employing a lot more glazing to bring in that sunshine, the connection to outdoors. So I think some of those elements, I know our senior living clients have already been asking us to brainstorm with them, how can we change what we're doing? What can we look to do on projects that are already under construction and moving forward? And that connection to outdoors is one of the biggest concerns or areas for opportunity that we're going to be looking for, both within residential units themselves as well as the communal spaces. How can we make those a lot more inviting and provide access to the outdoors in multiple locations in a building?
Great, thank you. Next question is, how will the new work at home aspect of life with COVID-19 impact urban design and the outdoor neighborhood? I imagine workers have different needs at this stage.
I think, my experience, what I've been seeing is that one of the advantages of working at home is it's a little bit more flexible. And, I'm seeing a lot more people that, in my neighborhood, getting out at lunchtime and walking and exercising. There's actually a new trail system. This is in my neighborhood, being constructed on some open space. There's a real desire by people to kind of get out and exercise and get fresh air. So I think, I see that continuing on, and, we're working on several kind of mixed use residential neighborhood type projects where all of them have trail systems integrated into them. I think it's becoming really kind of a necessity that in a planned neighborhood, and in really every neighborhood, even older neighborhoods, that being able to get out quickly and onto a trail or onto a sidewalk or onto a river walk or whatever it is, it's a quick trip to that kind of destination.
Okay, that's all we have for questions. If anyone has any additional questions, please enter them into the chat box or the questions box, or click the raise hand icon and I can enable your audio.
While we're waiting for a question, I just have a quick comment. There was a great article in the Boston Globe last Sunday about this very thing, about designs and how designs in response to COVID, but they also referred to the Spanish flu or whatever it was 100 years ago. And they said that's where the powder room came from. And the having a bathroom right inside the front door or somewhere on the front where people come in, so that folks could come in and wash their hands right away before they came into the house. And another thing that they mention is that for residential, there may be a lot more mud rooms again, where people can take off what they've been outside with and put on something else or wash their hands or whatever going in. So kind of an entry between being outside and coming into where you're going to be, whether it's in response to COVID or just going down the road, or in the future, that may be coming along. So,
yeah, I've even seen some articles in senior living communities of having hand wash basins that are out in the open, along a corridor or along a path, not necessarily tucked away into a powder room. And I don't remember this, I'd have to look it up, but I was even, someone reminded me that even Corbusier's Villa Savoy had a hand wash basin in the entryway. So it's going back to that, looking for ways to make our environment hygienic and streamlined. So the less sort of touch points are going into separate rooms and trying to make these places more accessible, and with something as simple as a hand wash basin that you don't have to hunt for, that's right there. That might be something that comes back. Yes.
Do you think that there would be some way to do that outside too? Like if people are on these trails and so forth and being outside and walking around or even going downtown, that there may be public hand washing places. I don't know. There used to be public bathrooms and there aren't anymore. And so maybe public hand washing places, maybe something that may pop up. I'm just putting it out there. I have no idea.
I think what probably is our crutch is all the different sort of products that are available nowadays. I don't think Corbusier had antibacterial products, that he could just squirt on his hands. So those sorts of things people may look to as this would be good enough. So we'll see.
Yeah, Robin, you bring up a good point. And a number of our projects recently over the last 5 years have had, drinking fountains, and not necessarily bubblers like we're accustomed to, but more bottle filling stations. That's very popular. I could see those same products, the bottle filling stations that might have a dog watering bowl on the bottom, could also very easily transition into hand washing stations. It would be not a very big leap to transition those same features to hand washing.
Great.
I would
We did
think
get one more
that would.
question.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Go ahead, Robin.
I was just going to comment to follow up with this thought. I would think that this would help so many people. I mean, just like the whole curb cut thing helps so many people besides just folks in wheelchairs. Having the hand washing, think of all the people who do not have a place to live and do not have a place to wash their hands or take a shower or whatever. So this would benefit those folks as well. And imagine how that could, and what kind of long-term benefits that would have just by washing hands, for having a place to wash your hands for the folks, especially in the bigger communities or the more denser communities, the folks who don't have a place to live, and yet they need to wash their hands as well, and they need to get water and so forth. So that's just a comment. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just saying there's another question that came in, and it says, are there sectors of the economy that are shifting into the past more quickly due to COVID-19 risks?
Brian, sorry, I didn't hear all of that.
I can repeat it. I think somebody's getting an echo. I don't know if you guys can mute your mics. But it says, are there sectors of the economy that are shifting into the past more quickly due to COVID-19 risks? Anybody want to take that one?
Did you say shifting into the past?
Yeah. That was from Karina. Karina, do you want me to enable your microphone and you can speak your question and elaborate?
That'd be great.
Karina, you're unmuted if you'd like to speak. Maybe not.
Yeah, I didn't really quite get the what she was getting at.
Yeah, Karina, we can't hear you. If you want to type it in the question box, I can read it if you want to elaborate. Let's see. Yeah, we still can't hear you, Karina. I'm sorry. All right, she says, I am asking if there are areas of the economy that will fall off and not recover from the challenges of COVID-19.
Well, I think unfortunately we've already seen a number of examples. There are going to be restaurants and small retailers that rely on street traffic to sustain themselves, and unfortunately, many have already stopped. And it's hard to imagine how long some of these folks that are just barely getting by, how long they'll be able to sustain it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with how much longer this is going to go on, and how, I mean, things are starting to open up and loosen up, and that's, I guess, good, so long as we don't kind of fall back into an expansion of COVID again. I know I've got a couple friends who are in retail, or I know a couple people in retail, and what has really saved them, and I'm talking about kind of like small shop retail, is that this didn't happen during the holiday season. So were able to get through the holiday season where they basically make 50% of their money, or if not more. And that has really allowed them to kind of ride it out. But the clock is ticking, really. And, time will tell, I guess.
Okay, that's it for questions.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Greg. This has been great. Do either of you have final comments that you want to make before we close out? It's a little bit early, but I think we'll still give everyone their 1.25 credits. Does anybody have any final comments that you would like to make? Any thoughts, comments on others? Okay. Well, for all of you who joined us today, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Our next Talk, which is a shorter version of a webinar, is going to be the first Tuesday in August 4th, and I will be actually talking at that one. And I'm going to be talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which sounds kind of wonky, but it really isn't. And how can you apply that concept to community planning going forward and design? And then our next webinar, which will be the second Thursday in August, is going to be about what COVID has revealed about housing, what it's revealed about transportation, and what it's revealed about the connection between the two in our communities here in New Hampshire. So we hope to see you then. Meanwhile, thanks again to Mark, to Jeff, and to Greg, and thanks everyone. And thanks to you, Brian, for all that you did behind the scenes there. So thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you.